Hello, Sean here. Today, I'd like to talk to you about a common pattern among many of my clients, and it shows up in my own life. And I suspect it may show up in yours. And in this brief video, I want to explain why this very common pattern, something that's so prevalent, I think most people would see it just as normal human socialization. And precisely because it's so common and normal, I think it's worth noticing. And it's got to do with integrity. And not integrity in the sense of moral rectitude, being upright, an upright citizen, and all that, as nice as that sounds. I'm talking about integrity in the original sense of something being a whole, being single, being undivided. And I learned about this original use of the word integrity that comes from the Latin integer from Martha Beck in her book, The Way of Integrity. And she talks about it in the context of engineering. So we can talk about a structure being having integrity. We talk about the structural integrity of a building or an aircraft. So think about an airplane flying through the air under immense pressure from outside. And the idea is that an aircraft can remain intact because it is whole. It is a structure that can withstand the pressure from outside. And the idea is that we can live a better life, a fuller life, a more satisfying life, a more impactful life, a life truer to our values when we live from integrity. And this means simply not playing different characters in different areas of our life. And this isn't exactly the idea that we should have no filter or that we should completely disregard social standards. It is, though, the idea of pushing the boundaries a bit. It's about playing with the boundaries, not necessarily rejecting all the boundaries, but definitely taking them less seriously. And Martha Beck talks about this in her own life and how it was both incredibly meaningful for her in terms of living a fuller, more honest life, and also very challenging. It doesn't. It has its. It has a. There's a price you pay for living in integrity. And I want to give you a small example of how we can start out with small. It's not a binary thing. It's not like living in integrity or not. It's how can we explore areas of our life where we could live with more integrity. And I don't think people realize it sounds kind of like something you might have learned in kindergarten, or rather, we knew how to live in integrity when we were in kindergarten. It's everything that happened to us since then that's prevented us from living in integrity. And Martha Beck talks about this being an academic, having completed a PhD at Harvard. And so those of you who have been in academia, who maybe were praised from a young age for being very bright, I know for me, this has been a challenge in my own life, that actually the thing that got you rewards and praise for much of your life is actually simultaneously something that holds you back from just being who you are. And Martha Beck talks about how she broke with her academic background when she left Harvard and to live a life in greater integrity. But I want to suggest that living in integrity does not necessarily require such a dramatic rupture. And I want to give you a very simple example from my own life of living in integrity. Not as virtue signaling, just it's an example. And it's got to do with my work as a teacher. I teach English for academic purposes to university students, to law students, business students, and geopolitics students. And a couple of years ago, I was given the opportunity to coordinate a course, and I got to have some influence over the curriculum. And so I was given the opportunity to choose to incorporate a unit on environmental law. And in this module, we learn not just about environmental law, but really why we should care about the environment at all, because I'm kind of appalled by how little deep, impactful education there is about the environment. And for me, it's become a passion project. So much so that I'm finding ways that it actually overlaps and feeds into my coaching in ways that I'm still discovering. And for me personally, many people think of the climate crisis as something scary or boring or just, yeah. And for me, I've realized it's a whole world. It's so many different things other than things getting warmer, that it's, for me, a source of great meaning, because it's not what everyone thinks it is. And I love trying to translate it into terms that my students can relate to, and seeing students going, oh, this is actually really interesting. Apart from being important, more importantly, they're interested and curious. And it sounds like I'm just selling myself, and maybe I am. But my point here is that it's actually been a constant struggle, because back when I was a law student, I tried to get into sustainability. I applied to work with the Sustainable Law Review, and it was a student-run journal. They didn't want me involved, so I got rejected, and then I kind of forgot about my interest in sustainability. But this is something that's actually been with me a long time, back to law school 20 years ago. And I just naturally, part of me just thought, okay, great, I'm teaching this course. I am going to share this aspect of something that just feels important to share. And yet I'm constantly questioning myself, second guessing myself, because it feels too personal. It's not strictly the role I was assigned. Luckily, I'm in a workplace where we're given latitude and we're allowed to have some say in our curriculum. But no one came and sort of said, they didn't bless me and say, they didn't anoint me and say, you have the scepter of environmental law. You are now the God-given authority. No. And I have spent the last couple of years, on the one hand, finding this one of the most interesting projects I've worked on, and on the other, constantly thinking, who am I to talk about this? And living in integrity is simply more and more not waiting for others to say, you're allowed to care about this. You're allowed to express the values you have. You're allowed to talk about this in this way. In my workplace, I often wonder, is it okay to talk about the climate crisis in such explicitly, because we often think of education should be apolitical, which I think is actually a terrifying idea, because ultimately, for me, when I talk about politics, it's got to do with values and ethics. And in that respect, if we take away ethics and values from education, I don't know what we're left with. Techniques. But this is something I'm just wanted to share, this struggle that I have faced over the last couple of years, and how, especially for those of us who identify as highly sensitive, we may have this very rich inner world of ideas that really matter to us, and creativity, and this really this deep urge to translate, to let that out. And at the same time, I can see in this in my clients too, that having spent a life allowing your gifts to come out in a very specific way. I was always rewarded for being articulate, for being a good writer, but then all of the other aspects of myself, being outspoken, being sometimes a bit dramatic, being a bit theatrical, was not only not appreciated, but I was in many ways reminded that I was too much. And so now in my 40s, I'm having to teach my nervous system slowly, that it's okay to be a bit theatrical. In fact, it's fun. And allowing yourself to identify that script of, sometimes we're in systems where it is actually others saying, no, you're not allowed to play this role in this context. And in that case, integrity requires more of a rupture. But often what's interesting is we're often in these spaces where either there is no opportunity, there is no immediate exit, so we have to make do, or we actually could stay if we we're more curious about how much of the script that we are obeying was really written by those around us, or if it's actually a script that's coming from within, from previous experiences. And this touches on, this relates to a concept called pluralistic ignorance. And it's this idea that we all project onto others an assumption of this is the norm of the group. And if, for example, my example might be, I have assumptions about a good teacher, a good professor should not do these things. They should not be too political. They should not talk about values too much. They should be neutral. And I project this a lot of the time. And I assume that I would be met with disapproval by my peers, by other people, if they really knew me. And what's interesting is they've done studies on this, and the fact is that often in groups, everyone individually thinks, oh, I'm the odd one out. I'm the one who's not like the rest. And it turns out that often your desire for greater expressiveness, for greater creativity, whatever it is, that feels so tied up with your vitality, with your eros, with your mojo, that if you could sit down and pour your heart out with people without that fear of going, oh, a person in this context does not care this much because that's unprofessional, then you might find out that we're all still playing out these old scripts. Okay, this is not magic. It requires effort and patience. Like I said, I mentioned this idea of the nervous system. It can feel surprisingly scary to be in greater integrity with yourself and to let those aspects of your personality come out. And so it's one of those things that you can try with little experiments. It doesn't have to be a big coming out. I mean, some people do it that way, but I'm not recommending it. Anyway, I want to close with a reminder of a new pet project of mine. It's called The Next Right Thing. It is an artificial intelligence guide. It's for the moment it's on OpenAI, on ChatGPT. It's a customized GPT, and it's basically a guide that I've given it a personality, and it's got I've trained it on the thinking of a couple of different experts on systems thinkers to do with the climate crisis, and it's basically three things. If you are interested in personal development and you're interested in things to do with, it could be inequality, the climate crisis, what we sometimes call the poly crisis. So you kind of feel like they're not necessarily connected. The idea of this project is to help build a bridge between people who are maybe considering a new career or exploring new aspects of their current career, just trying to maybe inhabit their role differently. So The Next Right Thing, it's a GPT, a custom GPT, and it has three purposes. You can ask it questions to help you learn about the environmental crisis. Secondly, it includes information about research-supported approaches to communicating important social issues like inequality or environmental breakdown in ways that actually land with other people. It's based on work by people like George Lakoff and Sarah Stein-Lubrano. And so it's becoming more knowledgeable, being able to being more skillful about communicating that new knowledge. And thirdly, helping you explore reasonable steps that you can take now. So it's helping you become more aware of your agency, that you do actually have a role to play, and doing this in a way that doesn't feel overwhelming. So in a nutshell, it's knowing what's going on, talking about it well, and doing what you can. And this is informed by acceptance and commitment therapy. Anyway, that's a subject for another video.